Ever get that feeling, like after a vacation, you open your inbox and it just explodes,
And right.
emails everywhere, right?
Yeah,
It's like a fire hose.
totally.
Now, imagine that, but it's not emails, it's all your cloud cost data, just
Yeah.
an absolute torrent of information.
Yeah,
That's what a lot of companies are wrestling with. It can be totally overwhelming.
absolutely. And that's where we get into the world of FinOps. Yeah.
Exactly. FinOps to the rescue.
Yeah. And specifically, this idea of data ingestion.
Okay, so let's break that down. Data ingestion, when we're talking about cloud costs, what does that actually mean?
So, like we were saying, you've got this flood of data coming in, right?
Mm-hmm.
Data ingestion is about how we capture all of that, clean it up, organize it, basically make it something we can actually use.
So it's about making sense of the chaos.
Exactly. Because you know what they say.
Hmm.
You can't manage what you can't measure. And in the cloud, there is a lot to measure.
So true. We've got this FinOps framework we've been diving into, and one thing that really struck me is how much it emphasizes not just gathering a ton of data, but the quality of that data. Why is that so important?
Well, think of it like this. Would you use a map to navigate if half the streets were missing or the names were all wrong?
That would be a nightmare.
Right? Inaccurate data is worse than useless. It can actually lead you in the wrong direction completely.
So when it comes to our cloud costs, bad data equals bad decisions.
Exactly. And those bad decisions can cost you big time. We're talking potentially thousands, even millions of dollars in overspending.
Okay, so garbage in, garbage out, got it. But here's where it gets even more interesting for me. This framework, it doesn't just stop at collecting all this raw cost data. There's more to it than just the numbers.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just about how much you're spending, but what you're getting for that spending. Yeah. That's where the real insights come in. We need to bring in business data too.
Give me an example. How does that work in practice?
Sure. So let's say you see this sudden spike in your cloud database costs. Now, that might set off alarm bells, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But by integrating business data, you might discover that the spike coincides perfectly with the launch of a new product feature that's been a huge hit with customers.
Okay, so suddenly that cost spike isn't something to panic about. It's a sign of success.
Exactly. You can directly link the increased spending to the value it's generating for your business.
That changes everything.
Right.
It's like the difference between seeing a random restaurant charge on your credit card statement versus seeing that charge and remembering that incredible meal you had with friends.
Perfectly said.
Yeah.
One is just a number, the other tells a story. And it's that story that helps you make informed decisions.
So how do we get started with all of this? It sounds like a lot to take in.
It can feel overwhelming, but the good news is you don't have to do everything at once. This framework, it talks about those crawl, walk, run stages of data ingestion maturity. Start small, get the basics down, and then you can gradually level up your data game over time.
So you're saying I don't need to ingest and analyze every single bit of data from day one.
Exactly.
That's a relief. What would be a good crawl phase then, a good starting point?
I'd say focus on getting a handle on your core cloud cost and usage data first.
Okay, so basically understanding how much we're spending overall and on what.
Exactly. Identify any big outliers, the things that seem out of place. Once you have that baseline, you can start to layer in more sophisticated data sources and analysis techniques as you go.
That feels much more manageable. So let's say I'm ready to embark on this data ingestion journey. Am I going it alone or do I need a team?
Oh, FinOps is definitely a team sport. You're going to want your finance folks, your engineering team, even procurement. Everyone needs to be on the same page, sharing data and communicating effectively.
So no more siloed data living in spreadsheets on someone's laptop.
Ideally not.
What happens when that communication breaks down?
Oh, it can get messy fast. Imagine if the folks managing your cloud budget have no idea what the engineering team is doing or what they're actually using those resources for.
Recipe for disaster.
Exactly. Everyone needs to be working together using the same data to make the best decisions.
Collaboration is key. Got it. But how do we even know if we're doing this data ingestion thing right? I mean, what does good even look like when it comes to all this cloud data wrangling?
Well, that's where those key performance indicators, or KPIs, come in.
KPIs, like what?
This framework highlights some really important ones, like take data currency, for example.
Okay, so how fresh is our data? Are we getting updates every hour, every day? What's the lag time between like real-time spending and when we see it reflected in our data?
Exactly. You want to be working with the most up-to-date information possible.
Makes sense.
Then there's something called ingest time. Basically, how long it takes to gather and process all of this data.
Right, because even if we're collecting all this data, if it takes weeks to actually make sense of it.
It's not much use, is it?
Exactly.
And then, of course, there's the ETL time.
ETL time.
Yeah, it stands for extract, transform, load. Right. It's basically all the behind-the-scenes work to clean that data, organize it, get it ready for analysis.
So we need to make sure that whole ETL process is as smooth as possible.
Absolutely. Otherwise, you're just sitting there waiting for insights while your cloud costs could be spiraling out of control.
Okay, so we need to make sure that whole ETL process is as smooth as possible. Are there, like, industry benchmarks for this? What's a good ETL time?
It can vary, to be honest. It really depends on your company's specific needs, the industry, your level of, FinOps maturity. But we are starting to see some benchmarks emerge as more companies adopt these FinOps practices.
Interesting. Okay, so maybe that's a conversation for another deep dive.
Totally.
Now, in our research for today, we came across this thing called the FOCIS project. What is it all about?
Ah, yes, FOCIA-DES. It stands for FinOps Open Cost and Usage Specification.
A mouthful.
I know, right? But it's trying to tackle this big challenge of standardization in the world of cloud cost data.
Okay, tell me more.
So imagine if there was this universal translator for all your cloud data. That's kind of what Foki is trying to be. It's about creating a common language that everyone can use, no matter which cloud provider they're on.
Oh, that's interesting. So instead of having like different dashboards and reports for Amazon, Google, Microsoft, we could have one unified view of everything.
You got it. And that's huge because it means you can easily integrate data from all those different sources, analyze it in a consistent way, even switch providers without having to start your whole data ingestion process from scratch.
It's like having a universal adapter for your cloud data.
Exactly.
No more struggling with incompatible formats and messy workarounds.
Exactly. And this all speaks to a larger point about data ingestion. It's not just about collecting the data, it's about making that data usable.
We talked about measuring data ingestion success with those KPIs, but this FOCIS project sounds like it's taking on an even bigger challenge, standardizing the data itself. What kind of impact do you think that could have on the whole FinOps world?
Oh, the potential is huge. For one, it could be a game changer for vendor comparisons.
Because right now...
Right now, it's a nightmare trying to compare costs across different cloud providers. They all track and report things so differently. It's like comparing apples to oranges.
Frustrating.
Incredibly. But with FOCIS, you've got this standardized way to look at your cloud spending no matter who your provider is. That could lead to more competitive pricing as providers try to be more transparent.
So not only does FOCIS make things easier for companies, but it could actually save them money in the long run.
Exactly. And it's not just about comparing vendors. Think about cost forecasting and budgeting. With standardized data, you can create much more accurate models to predict your future costs.
That's incredibly powerful.
It is. And it all comes back to having that solid data foundation in place.
So it seems like the whole industry is kind of rallying around this idea that good, clean, standardized data is essential.
Absolutely. Data ingestion is like the unsung hero of FinOps. It's the behind-the-scenes workhorse that makes everything else possible.
We've covered a lot of ground here, from data quality to the potential impact of this FOCIS project. For our listener who's just now diving into all of this, what's the one key takeaway you want them to remember?
Without it, you're trying to build a house on sand. It's just not going to hold up.
It'll collapse before you can say cloud migration. But
Right.
when you get that data right, it really does unlock so much potential. We've talked about vendor comparisons, cost forecasting, but are there other benefits to good data ingestion that we haven't even touched on yet?
Oh, tons. Think about security, for example.
Okay, security. How does that tie in?
Well, if you're ingesting things like security logs along with all your cost and usage data.
Right, because those are often separate.
Exactly. But if you can bring them together, you can start to spot potential vulnerabilities or anomalies much faster.
So instead of just seeing how much we're spending on a particular service, we could also see if someone's trying to access it inappropriately, or if there are any red flags in terms of data breaches.
Exactly. It's about connecting the dots between all these different data points to get a much clearer picture of what's happening in your cloud environment. And it's not just about security either. Think about performance optimization.
Okay, so walk me through that one. How does data ingestion help us make our cloud infrastructure run more smoothly?
Well, if you're ingesting performance metrics along with your cost data, you can start to identify bottlenecks. Maybe you're over-provisioning resources in some areas.
Paying for a ton of processing power that we're not even using.
Exactly. Or maybe a particular application is slowing everything down and needs more resources to run efficiently.
And we wouldn't know any of this without having all that data in one place.
Exactly. You need that complete picture to really optimize your infrastructure, improve performance, and ultimately reduce costs at the same time.
It's amazing how much of this comes back to having that good handle on your data from the very beginning.
It all starts with that foundation.
It really does. We've talked about a lot today. The what, the why, the how of data ingestion. We've talked about data quality, the FOCIOS project. For our listener who's maybe feeling a little overwhelmed with all of this information, what's the one key takeaway, the one thing you really want them to remember?
At the end of the day, I think the biggest thing is to realize that data ingestion, it's not just a tech thing, right? It's a business imperative.
Hmm.
Like if you're a company in today's world, you're driven by data,
Yeah.
especially in the cloud. The companies that figure out how to use that data well, those are the ones that are going to succeed.
It's not even just about saving a few bucks on your cloud bill. It's bigger than that. It's about having that competitive advantage.
Exactly. Making smarter choices, getting the most out of what you're doing, and ultimately, just getting better results for your business.
Hmm.
And it all starts with that data.
It all comes back to that. So for our listeners out there who are ready to jump in, what's one thing they can do, like today? One concrete step to wrangle their cloud data.
Honestly, just start talking.
Mhm.
Get your finance people, your engineering team, everyone in a room, and just start a conversation about data. What are you collecting? How are you sharing it? What's not working?
Breaking down those walls, getting everyone on the same page.
Exactly. And don't feel like you have to do everything at once. You don't need to boil the ocean. Pick one or two data sources, the most important ones, and figure out how to integrate those well. Then you can start adding more, little by little.
A journey, not a sprint, right?
Feel like it?
Well, we've covered a ton today. We've talked about why data quality is so important, what the FOCIOS project is all about, really gone deep on data ingestion.
And even with all that, we're just scratching the surface. It's an area that's constantly changing, so you always got to be learning.
Absolutely. For our listeners who want to keep digging into this, don't forget to check out those extra resources we mentioned, the stuff we used to prepare for this episode.
And remember, even small steps can make a big difference, so get started.
That's a great place to end it. Until next time, happy data wrangling, everyone.